It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. US Vice President Kamala Harris looks certain to run against Donald Trump as Democrats line up to support her. Will government asylum plans clear the backlog or open the door to more arrivals?
We will replace the Rwanda Migration Partnership with a serious returns and enforcement programme.
Small boat arrivals will increase. Deaths in the Channel, sadly, will also increase. The cost of asylum accommodation will increase.
Also today, a national emergency. Police chiefs sound the alarm on violence against women and girls.
Nobody in industry and in other sectors and across the public understand just the scale and impact of these crimes.
Joining us today, Labour MP Siobhan McDonough, Shadow Secretary of State for Transport Helen Whately, Nadine Batchelor-Hunt from Politics Home and political editor of The Sun on Sunday, Kate Ferguson. This is Politics Live. Yes, Vice President Kamala Harris says she has enough support from Democrats to be the party's presidential nominee. Let's just hear a little of what she had to say.
So in the days and weeks ahead, I, together with you, will do everything in my power to unite our Democratic Party, to unite our nation, and to win this election. Hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. And in this campaign, I will proudly put my record against his.
Nadine, are Americans ready to elect a woman as president?
Not just a woman of colour. I personally think that she's going to win. I know that currently the bookies have Trump ahead, but I do think that once the campaign gets started, I think she's going to edge it. And I think it's quite interesting how we had a campaign where we had Keir Starmer as kind of like, I used to be a prosecutor, now we've got the same kind of...
Yeah,
we've got
prosecutor versus a criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got Kamala Harris now in America, proudly wearing that record as a prosecutor. But no, and she's also, I'm half Jamaican myself, she's half Jamaican, it's quite nice to see. But on a serious note, I do think, you read about Project 25 and what Trump and his acolytes have got plan or want to do with America. This is a very consequential election. And I think that's why you've seen the Democrats throw themselves so quickly and so fast behind Kamala Harris, because they don't want to lose any time. Trump's been selected as candidate, he's got his VP, and the Democrats want to get their ducks in a row. And I think whoever is her VP will be, the VP candidate will be quite important. So I think that's what everyone's watching for next. Who will she choose as her running mate?
And time is critical. Do you think Americans are ready to elect a woman as president? Yes, of mixed heritage, Jamaican and Indian, particularly in those swing states, which are going to be really where the result is decided.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, we'll have to wait and see. I think what's interesting in those swing states is that she's going to have to go after people who are white, older, male, people that may not be super at ease with that. So that will be where the election is won and lost. And currently, she's trailing Trump in those swing states. So really it becomes how much momentum can her contest have? How much can she galvanise the Democrat base? Yes, but crucially, attract those swing voters.
I mean, there's been criticism, Siobhan, as Vice President, that Kamala Harris had remained somewhat invisible, so that the country didn't really know her. Do you think, though, when you think back to Hillary Clinton, are they ready to elect a woman as president?
I really want to believe they are. And Nadine, I wish I had your confidence. My worry is maybe not. I hope with my whole heart that she does.
Why not?
I just think politics treats women quite hard, but politics in America treats women even harder. And to be a black woman in those circumstances will be really tough. She's a fighter. She's got great experience as a prosecutor. She can speak to many people. Hopefully, there will be people who will come out. I think what's been interesting in all the elections that have happened in America since the Supreme Court ditched Roe versus Wade, so women don't have a right to abortion, have brought a whole new generation of women out to vote in elections, not necessarily formally Democrat supporting. So she does have pluses. but it is a huge challenge, and she's starting late.
2 points behind, not insurmountable, and certainly better polling than Joe Biden. And do you think it could happen that Kamala Harris becomes the first woman president?
Well, there's some months to go, so anything can happen in democracy. We know that from our own experience, how much can happen during a campaign. The thing I would hope that America will move beyond kind of identity politics and get to a point where people are voting based on values and policies. That's what people should vote on in a democracy, and I'd like to see that there, just as I'd like to see that here.
Right. I mean, what sort of campaign should she run?
I think she should run an optimistic campaign. I think one of the things that Kamala Harris is good at is, you know, there's a lot of jokes about her laugh and how she's always laughing and giggling or whatever, but she does have a kind of lightness to her that I think when you look at Trump's campaign, it's very kind of demagogic, lots of demagoguery, very negative, very angry. And I think what the Democrats should do is try and leverage that kind of positivity that Kamala Harris has. And also, you know, her record as a prosecutor and also her record in office. You know, she served as a VP. They can't argue that she doesn't know what the job requires. I think those are the things that they should focus on. And also, you know, the fact that she respects the rule of law. We can't forget, you know, we did see an insurrection on the 6th of January in 2021. Trump has 2021. Trump has consistently said that the election was stolen. So that kind of, you know, respect for rule of law, positivity, optimism, and you know, the idea of like a positive American spirit. I think they're things that Kamala Harris should bring to her campaign.
All right, let's talk about small boat crossings here. It dominated much of the campaign, certainly for the Conservatives. Over 2,000 migrants have been detected crossing the Channel in small boats since Labour came into office. One of the first acts of the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was to cancel the Rwanda plan. It was their pledge during the election, and they are carrying it out. Yesterday, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, told MPs she would reverse legislation that barred anyone arriving in the UK illegally since March 2023 from being granted asylum. Different reactions in the papers, unsurprisingly. This is the front page of the Daily Mail. Now Labour opens door to giving asylum to 70,000. The Guardian has this headline: failed Rwanda deportation scheme cost £700 million, says the Home Secretary. Are you opening the door to migrants?
Absolutely not. Hopefully we will resurrect the immigration bit of the Home Office and we'll actually start processing asylum claims, because part of the pull factor has been that the queues and backlogs have grown and grown and grown. So people could have a reasonable expectation if they came here illegally, they could just disappear into the system because their application was never getting processed. And nobody was being deported. You need a proper system, and we don't have it.
Helen?
Well, I don't think that's true, and actually something we saw as a result of the agreement that we reached with Albania is people were deported back to Albania, and then we saw the numbers of people coming here from Albania fall drastically, because then there was a deterrent in place, crucially, that people knew that if they... Can I just
Well, sure, let her finish her sentence, then I'll come back to you.
Finish what I was saying. So crucially, that was a deterrent. People knew if they came here from Albania, they wouldn't be able to stay. Unfortunately, one of the first things that the new Labour government has done is get rid of that deterrent. And so there's no reason not to, unfortunately, come here in small boats at the moment, even though, sadly, people are risking their lives to do that. But without the deterrent, people can just, I think, expect that they're going to stay. And
Except
the big question
small
is,
boat crossings did continue, of course. But Siobhan?
It was a deterrent that wasn't a deterrent because people were still coming. The gangs aren't tackled, people's claims aren't processed. The whole thing is a complete mess.
I think it's just, and again, that's not true. I know that around 1,000
any MP who does their casework knows exactly
around 1,000 people
true.
smugglers had in fact been arrested. So actually action was being taken on the gangs. We were, of course, working closely with France as well. So several of the things that I think your government is talking about, saying you're going to do, are actually things that are already happening. But the big thing that's changed is obviously that deterrent has gone. And what is the plan for the 60,000 or so people who've come here illegally, who've been detained? Are they going to now go into hotels? We were closing down the spaces in hotels being used for asylum seekers because of the processing that was going on. The question is, what's going to happen now under a Labour government?
What you were doing is you were taking people out of hotels and putting them into flats in an effort to make it look like things were different. You know, the numbers in hotels are going up and up and up because claims were not being processed.
But if claims are processed, and I don't know the precise numbers, but the vast majority of asylum applications that used to be processed were granted. So the vast majority of people who come over in small boats will have their applications processed and they'll be able to stay?
If they have a right to asylum, yes, they will. And if they don't, they should be deported.
Do you not think that might encourage more people to come over rather than acting as a deterrent?
I don't think so, no.
Really? Why not?
Well, because you have to have a system where you properly assess people's claims and remove them if they're unfounded.
Right. So if you can't be sent back, let's say your asylum application fails, where are you going to send people who come from Iran, Syria and Afghanistan to?
Well, you can send them to the first place they arrive in Europe.
We're back in that. But where would that be if it's France, for example? They've just come from France.
Well, I don't see why they can't go back to France.
Right. Is that
France has traditionally not been happy to do that. I mean, I know that I've heard people say that clearly in the doorsteps, but this is... You've got to have in government an actual plan that works.
But your plan didn't work.
And I feel like you don't have a plan for this.
Your plan didn't work, and it was obvious, and we were going to spend £2 million per person to send 200 people to Rwanda.
I mean, actually what we heard is that people were waiting on the other side of the channel and weren't coming across because they were waiting for a Labour government, because we had a plan that was...
I think you're making stuff up now, aren't you? Because clearly nobody thought they were going to Rwanda.
I mean, there's no way of handling migration cheaply. It's always going to, when there are so many people trying to come.
But there is a difference between a proper system and gimmick. And even your own former Home Secretary, James Cleverly, called it, if you excuse my language...
well, let's just refrain from using, yes, bat crazy. But anyway, yes, with your own preface in there. I mean, in terms of the reaction now, Stop the Boats was Rishi Sunak's slogan and phrase. And, of course, he didn't stop the boats. No flight went off to Rwanda under this particular scheme. So the plan failed.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is here, right, is that now it's Labour's problem, and it is a huge problem. These boat number crossings are going up and up. It looks like this year will be a record year. Now, Keir obviously has scrapped that scheme. He always says he would. But crucially now, it becomes a question of how do Labour... What's your deterrent if you say Rwanda would never work? And it seems to me that Labour's taking it on this idea that you can get returns agreements up, you can more swiftly deport people back to certain countries. But the proof will be in the pudding. If the numbers still go up, I think Keir Starmer will pay a big political price for getting rid of Rwanda before it was given the option to work.
Nadine?
I think ultimately the way to tackle this is kind of cooperation with other countries. You need to, these migrants are travelling through various countries to come to the UK. To deal with this is, first of all, have cooperation with them. You're talking about returning people to France or whatever, but you need to kind of have conversations with them and create those kind of agreements. And secondly is creating safe and legal routes. If we've got asylum seekers coming from Afghanistan who were former interpreters, who were left when we had that chaotic evacuation, a few years ago, then why haven't their claims been dealt with by now? And it is a genuine question. We talk about these 70,000 people. A lot of these people were just languishing. The Home Office was leaving them languishing. So there is a problem with the Home Office in terms of processing asylum claims. And I think that is going to be part of dealing with the problem. But I do think every government across, in the West, from America to here, is struggling with the question of mass migration and how to deal with that.
Right.
And I think it will be one of the things that Labour gets judged at the next election.
I think the interesting thing is, Jo, something that you alluded to, right, which is a lot of these applications are going to be granted because they historically have been. If you come from Iran, Afghanistan, Syria...
And they're genuine.
Yeah, but yes, but you will see those numbers go up, and it is an honest question for anyone in government, which is, are you happy with this levels of asylum claims from these certain countries? Now, the Conservatives said they weren't. They had the Rwanda plan. Labour, it seems to me, are pretty at ease with those numbers from those countries. Is that right?
Siobhan, are you?
Well, what we're dealing with is a mess. We're dealing with the fact that the eye was taken off the ball and actually dealing with immigration issues at all, to this fantasy Rwanda scheme, which was never going to happen, which was just a big bin that we poured taxpayers' money in and doesn't resolve the issue.
But are you happy with those sorts of numbers that we could be talking about? Tens of thousands of people coming across, having their asylum claims processed and being granted asylum here?
Clearly not. We're going to have a system that actually works. We're going to have to negotiate with other countries, and ultimately we have to work with other countries to
Yes, but do you accept then, if the numbers stay as high as they are now or go up, that will be politically problematic?
I mean, this whole issue is
So you will pay a price in the way Kate was saying?
Well, it is a difficult one that we have to deal with. I mean, to win elections is to govern and to deal with these issues.
Right, so you do want to see the numbers come down then?
Yes.
Right, I mean, significantly, what numbers are we talking about on terms of what has been deemed illegal migration coming across in small boats?
Well, you wouldn't want to see any illegal migration.
Well, except if they're coming here and claiming asylum because they're fleeing persecution, it's the only way to come here, and you're saying those asylum applications will be processed.
To the idea of proper routes to actually come here and claim asylum.
Right, so you'll have more routes, more safe routes?
Well, I would hope so.
Right. I mean, it all sounds vague, if you don't mind me saying, Siobhan McDonough, even if the ambition is still to reduce the numbers. The problem, Helen, is that the Rwanda scheme has been deemed a failure because it is a failure. No flights took off. We don't know whether they would have done. And something like £700 million has just gone down the drain.
Well, unfortunately, the new government cancelled the scheme and cancelled the flights, so didn't give an opportunity.
You've been promising to stop the boats for months and months.
But you'll know, as somebody very deep in studying politics and covering it, is that those plans and our legislation to make it work kept being blocked, whether it was blocked by Labour, whether
because
it was
they were unworkable
by the House of Lords
or the Supreme Court, or
clearly. So we had to keep reworking the plans till we got legislation through. We got there.
This
we
was
then
just
you just
about
keep talking.
A headline.
Siobhan,
about
I listened.
Sean,
I listened.
Hang on, Helen.
I did
all right.
listen
Well, let Helen respond.
You said. So it was clearly very hard to get to a point where we had the legislation in place because, in part of, for instance, opposition from the House of Lords, we got there, it was ready to go, but unfortunately the Labour government has come in and cancelled it without a plan. And one of the things of why this is so important is we must control illegal immigration so that we can actually have a compassionate asylum system that does provide safe routes for people who are genuine asylum seekers, not just those, for instance, who are able to get in a boat and cross the Channel, who in the process sadly risk their lives doing that as well.
How disappointed are you that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, didn't mention or talk about creating more safe and legal routes?
We've been in 2 weeks.
It's true.
I mean, I've had my first email of disappointment from a constituent who's as yet unhappy we haven't built more houses or more hospitals. But I think we've been in 2 weeks and I think we've made a great start.
I mean, just one final thing in terms of working here, because Yvette Cooper did write, in fact, in your paper, The Sun, on Sunday, that she'll crack down on those working here illegally, particularly citing hand car washes and nail bars. Do you think that would act as a deterrent too?
Yeah, I mean, so they're going to ramp up these illegal immigration raids. They're going to target these sectors we all know are pretty common sectors for illegal immigrants to work in: nail bars, beauty salons, car washes. I think, look, if you raid these places and find illegal immigrants and are able to deport them quickly, that's clearly what government should do and a good thing. I think Labour's whole kind of strategy hinges on doing that a lot, so that you're bringing numbers down so swiftly that it almost acts like a deterrent. And I think we're yet to see if that will work. You know, will you be so effective with your raids that it kind of leaks through and people know they can't stay here?
Well, I mean, one of the draws could be the more flexible labour market, no ID cards. Would you be in favour of ID cards?
Oh, I am in favour of ID cards, and I think they're inevitable.
Do you?
Interesting. You need to get David Davidson tomorrow.
Well, when you say inevitable, is it something that you have heard is going to be discussed?
I think it's inevitable because we're going to need more and more ID for accessing all sorts of government services, all sorts of government services, but all services. So I think by stealth we're going to get to an ID card.
Inevitability about ID cards?
I think it would be strange if it was simply just because of immigration that we introduced identity cards. But I do think as we get to a more digital world, I don't know what the future of things like online safety are going to be. Are people going to have to start using, verifying their identity more online? I do think we'll probably end up moving more towards a society where we have less privacy. I mean, that's inevitable with technology.
I think medical records alone, I think that will be a big driver of any ID system, so that they can be accessed, so that we can make sure people get the right treatments, quite apart from the more, what's the right word, kind of policing of services. It's about making sure that we're giving people the right services.
All right, let's talk about this frightening headline, The Times. Violence against women and girls a national emergency. The police report says problem is the same size as terrorism, with 1 in 12 women a victim each year and 1 in 20 people a perpetrator. What was your reaction, Kate, when you heard that this morning?
I thought it was... What's the phrase I used? I said it was shocking but not surprising. I mean, it's interesting here, you just probably through coincidence have an all-female panel here today.
Yeah, it is a coincidence.
Which I'm sure is a coincidence. But I mean, this idea of violence against women, you know, it's something that is endemic, it's pretty everyday. And it's clear, like, not enough has been done to tackle it. It's a tricky issue to tackle. So I used to be, before I was a political reporter, I was a court reporter. If you go and sit in a Crown Court and sit in on rape cases, you know, they're occasionally brought to court. They're not very highly convicted. You know, it's a complex problem. But it's pretty clear that we need to be tackling it much more vigorously at every level, from getting police officers in the recruitment process that respect women in the first place, rather than are themselves offenders against women, arrest people who are showing red flags early on, rather than waiting to the very end of the process. And also, you know, teaching people in schools, teaching our kids just basic respect of each other. It doesn't need to be more complicated, or it's not a kind of magical mix. It's the basics, I think.
I mean, is it a more societal problem? I mean, a national emergency sounds like everybody should be doing something that hasn't been done up until now to stop the broad spectrum of violence, whether it is sort of at one end stalking, although again that could lead to rape at the other end. But what did you think when you heard some of the statistics, Nadine? You know, 20% of all recorded crime is violence against women.
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I would, one of the things that I kind of thought of immediately was when I remember being at university and being on a night out, and a man just like smacked me on the bum extremely hard when I was just out with my friends, and that was a violent act. And I look back on that now and think I should have reported that. I should have told the police, because it really hurt. And I actually was shocked, and I kind of looked at him and he grinned and laughed in my face. And then for me, that's one of my experiences with violence against women and girls. It's just seen as this sort of feature of society that we're just supposed to put up with. And, you know, we have these conversations so often. You know, when Sarah Everard was taken and raped and murdered, we said as a society we would tackle this and we would take this seriously. But it just never seems that it is. And I think one of the things that this government has an opportunity to do is to make sure that rape cases in courts are fast-tracked and got through and actually heard. You know, we've got a huge problem in justice with cases even being heard. And the consequence of that is often men who would go out and do these crimes know that there's probably it's unlikely they'll be convicted for these crimes. So I think making sure that men who are violent to women, be it rape, murder, you know, domestic violence, face legal consequences as a bare minimum is something that we need to be seeing in this country.
I mean, this has happened on your watch in terms of the Conservative government since 2010, because it's increased exponentially in that time. Why?
So I think one of the things that you said a moment ago that was right is about this being a societal problem. Clearly there's a big role for government to play, the role for police to play, and also for the whole of society. And in fact, indeed, schools, I know, do a lot about talking about relationships.
They do.
Trying to educate young people and educate our kids about what a good relationship involves. I do think, actually, as a government, there is a lot that we have done to tackle violence against women and girls.
And yet
Theresa
it's gone
May
up.
clearly did a lot on this, among other ministers. Things like tougher sentencing for rapists and stalkers. Things like identifying new crimes. So, for
Helen,
coercive control.
You look at the statistics, and it flies in the
crime.
face of the things that you're saying, because the backlogs in courts are incredible, as you know, and that will be from cuts in resources in the Justice Departments, in all unprotected departments that have affected police and justice. So you're making a list of improvements that you have said, but in some cases, rape, for example, has, in the words of some campaigners, been almost decriminalised, and that has happened under Conservative government's watch.
So I know that if you mention the word pandemic, there's a general groan about it, but clearly we do know that there were some backlogs which were driven by things like court hearings not being able to happen as normal during the pandemic and catch up going on from that. But the other area which I particularly want to talk about for this is, of course, the role of the police. Very important. Something that we did in government was specifically identified violence against women and girls as a national threat for police to take it more seriously. I've spoken to my local police force in Kent about how they have been taking it more seriously. I think that's really important. Also, rightfully, it's a right thing that more people are coming forwards and reporting experiences of violence and domestic violence. I mean, Nadine, your horrible experience. I also, as a teenager, remember being groped on a tube, and it was just a thing that happened. It didn't cross my mind all those years ago that the thing you might go to the police about. Now, I think it's... No, yes, we have to address and stop the crime happening in the first place, but it also is a good thing that people are coming forward.
I mean, Labour's manifesto say they want to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. Why halve? I mean, I don't know how you would sort of quantify it, apart from obviously looking at the specific recorded crimes. I mean, some people might say, why not have an ambition to eradicate it or do 2/3? I mean, how will you do it?
I suppose it's about being realistic about what you can do from the place we are right now. Some of the things we would do is to make sure there's a specialist in every call centre for the police, in every police force, to have particular courts that actually deal with these issues in order to fast-track them through so we can get over some of the backlogs.
No more money is being committed by this Labour government, as was very clear for reasons that were set out by Rachel Reeves. You don't want to spend a penny that hasn't been costed. There is no money that has been allocated to unprotected public spending departments like Justice.
But the effort, nevertheless, as you've pointed out, is to actually halve violence against women.
Yeah, but you want to fast-track rape cases with specialist courts at every Crown Court location in England and Wales. Introduce domestic abuse experts in control rooms, 999 control rooms, so that victims can talk directly to a specialist. Ensure there's a legal advocate in every police force. You know, these may transform the experiences for women and young girls. That costs money.
Yeah, and it will be a reallocation of resources. There may be more money, but I've come back to the point that we've been in for 2 weeks now. I think perhaps you should come back, and if we don't manage it, make the point that right now that is our intention, and if that's our intention, that's where... Unlike Nadine, I am shocked at these figures, because when I was a child, you didn't talk about domestic violence or sexual abuse. There was a sense of shame. People knew it went on, but nobody spoke about it. So I always assumed that kind of the fact that people were more prepared to talk about it and to say that they had been a victim would lead a kind of sunshine on the issue, and that we will see improvement. I mean, I'm just terrified at the amount of pornography that very young kids see on phones, and whether that distorts relationships and views about women and how women should be treated. And these are all incredibly difficult things.
Yeah. And also, there's like nothing we haven't talked about that yet, right? But the thing that has also emerged in the past decade or 15 years is social media, the smartphone, the kid having access to pretty hardcore pornography in their hand. And I think how that can fuel a sort of just a quite negative attitude towards women. Exactly. I mean, I go back to the point that you were making, Jo, which is at the higher level, when you're talking about criminal cases in Crown Courts, you know, you are just not remotely seeing those conviction rates. And maybe you need to have a more honest conversation about how rape allegations, charges actually can translate into conviction.
Campaigners this morning were talking about whether young men should be criminalised for a first minor, whatever that might be, offence, because otherwise there is going to be a massive increase in the number of young men being criminalised and put in jail. What's your feeling about, because you said earlier people should face justice for any of these crimes that are deemed violence against women?
I think there should be consequences, and I think one of the challenges that there are at the moment, I mean, even at school, like looking back to the way in which boys would talk about other girls at school, the things they talk, the language, it's kind of shocking, and I'm hoping, you know, it's been 15 so years since I was at school, but I'm hoping that it's not like that now. But it was shocking, and pornography was one of the things that was driving that. But I do think consequences, and it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, jail time straight away, but knowing that there are consequences to sexually harassing a woman, there are consequences to putting your hands on a woman's body without her permission, I think would deter some of that. And then the people that, you know, go on to do more violent crimes, I think it more difficult to stop them. But I think the lower level stuff that makes our lives difficult when we're going out with our friends trying to have a fun evening and we do get sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, those sorts of things can be
learning
stopped.
that there's a staircasing in these things. So people may have laughed off being flashed at, but we now know that that isn't just this thing that happens. It then, without action, and we didn't previously understand that.
I'm sure we'll return to this issue, particularly since the police report is saying it is a national emergency. But let's catch up with what's happening in terms of the timetable for the Conservative leadership contest, because the details have been announced. Ian Watson, BBC political correspondent, joins us now. Ian, what is that timetable?
Well, Jo, I don't think you could accuse the Conservatives of rushing in to replacing Rishi Sunak. He's going to have to continue as leader of the opposition until November the 2nd. But let me take you through each stage. The excitement, of course, gets underway tomorrow because then nominations open for those who want to succeed Rishi Sunak. They close early next week. Conservative MPs only need 10 of their colleagues to nominate them or to support them to get onto the initial ballot. But then the numbers will be cut back to 4 in September, and then these 4 will go to the Conservative Party conference in the autumn and be on parade, parading their political views, which some people have called, perhaps inappropriately, a kind of beauty contest. But it will get interest up, perhaps, in that event, given that the party is going to be in opposition. Then what happens after that is their fellow MPs cut the numbers back to the final 2. There'll then be an online ballot, and we'll get that new leader announced in November. So some people will be campaigning, of course, over the summer, but I think the main focus is going to be the Conservative Party conference in the autumn.
All right, just hold for 1 second, Ian. Helen, we've heard Damien Green and Steve Baker, Conservative colleagues. Steve Baker lost his seat, saying they're going to back Tom Tugendhat. Who are you backing?
I haven't declared. We don't even know who's going to be standing yet because nominations are only just
Well, we've got a good idea about the choice. James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, Kemi Badenoch, Mel Stride, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, to name but a few. Any that you'd rule out there that you definitely won't be supporting?
So actually what I will say is I was one of the people who argued that I thought we should have a relatively long process, like the one just described. The reason for that is I think we need to take the time to reflect on what we heard from voters clearly at the election, who very much didn't want us to continue in government. So reflect on that, listen, learn, and for the candidates to set out their vision for what they want for the future, what they want for the party. We need to have that conversation, and then on the back of that conversation, then that's the time to then make our choices.
In terms then of the direction of the party, would you be happier with a more centrist candidate with that sort of vision, or someone more ideologically to the right of the Conservative Party?
Well, you can, where do I sit in the party? Some people call me a centrist, but on the other hand, I'm pretty much, I feel an economic conservative, and that's very much where I would want to see us setting out a vision for, what do we want for the country? All these things to do with, I think we're going to talk about it in a moment, for instance, on welfare and making sure work pays and the fundamentals of the economy. These things are so important. Right. So I would certainly want our candidate to be somebody who puts the economy front and centre.
All right. Well, you mentioned welfare debate, the King's Speech debate. The King's Speech setting out the government's agenda, which has been going on since last week. An amendment has been selected, Ian, an amendment that puts Labour under some pressure because some of its MPs want to see the two-child benefit cap scrapped. Ian, maybe can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Jo. Yes, okay. Sorry, you. It was only about you obviously cut out. So
at a rather opportune moment,
yes,
or inopportune
exactly.
moment. The
two-child accused of not being silent, actually.
The amendment, an amendment that's been selected to the King's Speech that's being debated, puts pressure on Labour over the two-child benefit cap that some Labour MPs want to see scrapped.
Yes, that's right. So basically, in the past hour, the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, has chosen an SNP amendment which says that it's vital that this two-child limit in the benefit system, which prevents people who have a third child or subsequent children from getting extra payments via universal credit, that should be scrapped as a matter of priority. Now, that amendment's signed not just by SNP members, but Plaid Cymru as well, and some independent MPs. It's not signed by any Labour MPs. There was another amendment which was signed by 20 left-wing Labour MPs, calling for much the same thing, to be perfectly honest. But I think, given this is going to be an opposition party putting this forward, the hope in Labour's benches is that at least those who are very sceptical towards the current Labour position, which is that they can't afford to do this yet, that they perhaps might sit on their hands rather than actually cast a vote against the new Labour government. Nonetheless, there will be a debate on this issue, and the SNP will certainly be hoping to get a rebellion in Labour's ranks. I think that is partly the purpose of it. But certainly the language that's been used by Labour's front bench at the moment, Keir Starmer yesterday, for example, saying he understands the passions in this, there is going to be a review into reducing child poverty. The signals seem to be that in due course Labour may well reach this position, but what they're not going to do at this stage is simply undermine their message that they will not promise anything which they can't afford.
Ian Watson, thank you very much. Worrying for new Prime Minister, new government, a rebellion like this over a policy. They've got their teeth into it, haven't they?
I think it's part of being in government, isn't it? I mean, I imagine that they're all trying to grapple with it, deal with it. It's not come as a surprise. It's a pretty horrible thing that most of us who were MPs at that time voted against the measure. So nobody likes it. But it's the question of what can you afford? What's the most important thing to do with the money you've got? And so most people will be reflecting on that.
Right, and that isn't the most important thing, you feel, is to spend money on families who want to have more than 2 children?
It might not be. That what Labour's announced is a review looking at poverty and how you best take people out of poverty. Because what we know in government, in politics, there is always a good reason to spend money, but you have to be sure that what you're spending on it is the most effective at actually achieving that.
All right, well, one of the priorities of this government is making work pay, incentivising those who are unemployed to rejoin the labour market and get Britain working. Let's hear what the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, said this morning.
I want to make sure that we actually get more people into work and on in their work. This huge problem of 2.8 million people, a record number, trapped out of work due to long-term sickness. There's really clear evidence that most of those, actually, if they got the right help and support, skills, childcare and other help, actually want to have a job at some point now or in future. Whereas the Conservatives wrote people off, denied them the support that they need and then blamed them for the position they're in, this government will act.
It's your fault, Conservative government's fault. You failed all those people and there is a record number of economically inactive due to sickness.
Well, a couple things. So I welcome Liz Kendall also saying, as we in government have done, as I very much strongly believe, that it's very important to make sure that if you can work, you are in work, something we did a huge amount of work on. I obviously don't agree with Liz's analysis of the situation that we're in and also what we did in government. Right now, Labour has taken on a legacy of historically low unemployment. And in fact, unemployment has halved since we came into government in 2010.
What about those 2.8 million people who are on long-term sick?
So I'll come to that. Unemployment halved since we came to government in 2010 and 4 million more people in work. But yes, particularly coming out of the pandemic, we have seen more people come out of the labour market, whether that's some people taking early retirement, but also more people who are not working because they are unwell. Exactly something which we were bringing in reforms before the election, which unfortunately Labour opposed. But for instance, things that we were doing to help people stay in work alongside ill health, reforms that I was involved into fit notes. So that's the fit note or sick note that you get from the doctor, from your GP, if you're unwell and think you can't work. Well, we were bringing in reforms to that process so that you're better able to get the support that you might need to stay in work. Now, I very much hope that in government Labour will continue some of these things, because actually there's a difficult problem to solve and this is the right way to go.
Well, clearly, because you had 14 years to deal with it, but obviously it became a bigger problem, no doubt, post-pandemic, because a lot of people will have long-term COVID. What's wrong with changing the fit note culture, taking it away from doctors?
Because that's not necessarily going to sort it out, is it? You have to deal with people as individuals where they are and see what the barriers are to them getting into work. We know that working is best for the individual, best for their family, best for the economy. So how do you do that? So I think boiling it down to local government and getting particular specific policies for individuals, what might work. I was in the last Labour government, Gordon Brown as Chancellor had this mantra of if you can work, you should work. And even though that is so simple and so obvious to all of us...
I don't see how that's going to change. How's that going to change the situation, having a mantra?
Because you have to, because it changes, it challenges. We've got to a position where actually it's all right, it's understandable that you're on the sick. What you have to do is find out ways to help people get into work.
Helen?
Just on some of the practicalities. So, for instance, the conversation that somebody would have with their GP when they think they need some time off work. And some GPs will talk to somebody about, well, do you need some help to stay and work? But for many GPs, actually, we all know GPs are really, really busy diagnosing and treating people. So actually, the reforms we were working on is that conversation should be had with somebody else, for instance, somebody else who's experienced in supporting people on how their relationship with their employer works and what adjustments they might need, whether they might need to be supported to work from home, things like that. So that's the kind of practical reform that we were looking at, knowing that it's not necessarily always the right conversation to have with the GP.
Years, and there is another 800,000 people on the sick since 2019.
Well, as Jo said, one of the things that's happened out of the pandemic, as we have seen more people off sick. Also, one of the things that we're seeing is more people off sick with mental health problems. That is a big challenge for our society.
Helen, there are some striking figures that the Office for National Statistics have done that show in the UK there are far more people inactive since the pandemic compared to almost every other comparable country. Why?
Yeah, we've really struggled to get these people back to work. There has been this big explosion of people signed off sick for mental health problems. Worryingly, a lot of them are in their 20s. What's the worst thing you could do for someone's long-term health, someone's prospects, someone's happiness prospects, as well as career prospects, is to be on long-term sick? I wondered, though, Siobhan, you said Gordon Brown had this mantra, if you can work, you should work. There's obviously dignity in work. That one of the Tory policies, which I don't think we've heard from Labour yet, is that if you refused to work over a year, but you were deemed fit to work, you would have your benefits taken away. That was one of your reforms. And I don't think we've heard if Labour are going to stick to this or not.
Well, I think there has to be, in every policy, a stick and a carrot.
So would you support that?
I think in some cases I would, but what hasn't worked is the fact that people are just having their benefits docked if they don't do things. I'm always amazed that people are prepared to manage with such little money, and that necessarily isn't an incentive to get people back to work. Right. I think you have to encourage, I think you have to show example, I think you have to ease people into the workplace. And I'm sure that the vast majority of people, as you say, when they get there, are much happier, have options and alternatives they only dreamed of before.
One of the things I will say that we haven't spoken about, particularly with young people and mental health, is the NHS mental health care system just is non-existent. I've had various mental health problems throughout my life. I've regularly used it, and it is atrocious. And people in NHS mental health care are screaming it from the rafters. We're talking about an epidemic of young people out of work with anxiety and depression. I mean, we've lived through a pandemic. We've had we've had a cost of living crisis. Life feels extremely difficult for many people. And then if they do go to the doctor and ask for help, they could be told, as I was at one point, it's going to be 9 months till you can see a psychiatrist. So we can't really talk about getting these people back to work without talking about getting the mental health care. People who have diagnosable psychiatric conditions, for example, it won't just be a matter of working from home for them. They need medication and they need treatment. So we can talk as much as we want about, getting people into work, trying to motivate them. But the worst thing you can say to somebody who is struggling with anxiety and depression is, if you just feel a bit better and be more positive about working. You need medical treatment, and we need to talk about mental health as seriously as we would about a broken leg. We just don't in this country, and NHS mental health care isn't working.
Briefly, Kate?
I think that is certainly true about mental health problems. I mean, lots of people have dealt with that. I'm not sure that always needs to be... You indicated there almost that people would need medical treatment in terms of pills or whatever. I'm not sure that's always true.
A psychiatrist.
Yes, I mean, look, it is true that if you're able to manage to work, even with anxiety, depression, if you are able to, it is better for your mental health if you can.
But we're talking about people who have signed off.
It is better if you can.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for today. And tomorrow I'll be back at the earlier time of 11:15 for the first Prime Minister's Questions for Keir Starmer.